In this video, we'll be taking a look at 5 college basketball games happening on January 17, 2026, and providing you with free team picks and total picks for each one of those games, so 10 picks in total. Welcome back to Cash Out Sports. Let's dive right into it. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and to click the bell icon to get notified as soon as these videos get released so that you have more time to plan out your bets as we provide these videos on a daily basis. I can guarantee that you'll have all the important information that you'll need on these 5 college basketball games after fully watching this video. One more thing before we start, if you would like to gain access to our best exclusive sports picks to take your journey to the next level, then check out our Patreon in the link down below, where we offer our best single picks, parlay picks, and much more. Now let's get started. Duke versus Stanford. You get a real treat when a heavyweight packs its bags and walks into someone else's gym. And that is exactly the vibe here with Duke heading out to the farm to see Stanford. It is not just another non-conference pit stop either. It is a true road test with a ranked blue blood that has been playing like a 1 seed all year, facing a Stanford group that has been solid, proud, and a little bit feisty at home. Duke comes in sitting at 16-1 with that kind of win-loss line that usually earns a very low number next to its name on Selection Sunday. They are not just scraping by either. They have been hammering teams, stacking double-digit wins, and putting together the sort of offensive and defensive balance that makes coaches lose sleep. The numbers tell you they score efficiently, they guard with real teeth, and they do both while keeping the tempo up enough to keep opponents uncomfortable. That kind of profile travels well, and honestly, for a team like this, a cross-country swing can feel more like a business trip with better scenery than a major disruption. On the other side, Stanford is no pushover, and you can feel that in the way they play at Maples. This is a group that leans on spacing, shooting, and a smart half-court approach rather than trying to run you out of the gym. They have found ways to hang in with talent by moving the ball, hunting quality looks, and feeding off that tight, quirky home atmosphere where it feels like the crowd is almost on top of the floor. The catch here is that the front court has not exactly been at full strength, with rotation forwards like Chisamok Para, Krister Skrinda, Evan Stinson, and Talis Toure all popping up on recent availability reports, which is not what you want when the opponent shows up with a front line that lives on the glass and wins the physical battles. You can play clever and you can shoot well, but when your depth up front is patched together and the other team is bigger, deeper, and more explosive, the margin for error shrinks fast. There is also the market angle, which quietly tells its own story. Oddsmakers opened this with Duke as a healthy favorite, an early action nudge that spread upward from roughly Duke -8.5 into the -9.5 range. That is not some earth-shattering move, but it does suggest that early bettors were more comfortable backing the favorite to win by margin than grabbing the home dog and hoping for a close one. When you pair that with the gap in talent, the difference in depth, and the way Duke has already handled a stop at Cal on this same trip, it starts to feel like we are looking at a matchup where the better team is trusted to impose its style over the full 40 minutes rather than flirt with a tight coin flip. As our first pick for this matchup, the Duke Blue Devils to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Books have hung a total number in the mid-140s, which on the surface suggests a game with plenty of pace and plenty of scoring from both sides. At first glance, that fits the image many people have of Duke running and Stanford shooting threes, but once you scratch a bit beneath the surface, the picture gets a lot murkier. Stanford's offense is built in a way that can look very loud on a highlight reel but can be surprisingly fragile across a full game. They like to shoot from deep, they are comfortable with a decent volume of threes, and they tend to look their best when they can slow things down, run clean half-court sets, and let their shooters and creators pick spots. When those outside shots fall, the whole building feels like it lifts, and the score can rise in a hurry. When they do not, possessions stretch out, long misses turn into runouts for the other side, and you can end up with long stretches where the scoreboard barely moves. That volatility is fun for fans, but for a total that sits fairly high, it introduces a real risk that one cold spell drags the entire game under the number. Here is the thing, Duke has a knack for dragging opponents into their kind of game even when the pace on paper looks fast. They can play quick, no doubt, but their defense has this habit of forcing teams deep into the shot clock, taking away first and second options, and making you work for every look. We have already seen them turn big-name matchups into lower-scoring grinders, like that tight one against Michigan State that felt like every bucket was earned, or the road win at Cal that landed in a more modest scoring range. When a defense holds opponents to poor shooting nights and controls the glass, it quietly chops possessions off the game and shaves points off the final tally. It is not flashy, but bettors notice. Layer the injury context back in, and you get another gentle push. Stanford's banged-up front-court pieces are not just about size and rebounding. They also affect how fearless you can be attacking the paint, how much rim pressure you can generate, and how often you might settle for jumpers instead of forcing the issue. Meanwhile, Duke's rotation is already operating as if their long-term absences are baked in, so what we have seen from them lately on defense is basically the product they bring into this one. All of that nudges the likely script toward a game that feels tense, controlled, and perhaps a bit more methodical than the opening total suggests, where every run is answered by a stretch of grinding, half-court possessions rather than a full-on scoring race. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Purdue versus USC. When the Big Ten takes a little business trip to Los Angeles, this is exactly the kind of matchup you get. A heavyweight that has been living in the national title conversation rolling into a glamour market to test how real the new kid in the conference is. Purdue comes in playing like a machine, sitting at 16-1 overall and 6-0 in league play on an 8-game heater, while USC is 14-3 and still feeling out life in the Big Ten spotlight at the Galen Center. The books have looked at all of that and treated Purdue like a proper road bully, hanging them as a favorite by multiple possessions in that high single-digit range, which is basically Vegas saying, "We know it is a long flight, and we still trust these guys to control things." Stylistically, this feels like a contrast you see a lot in March. On one side, you have Purdue, perfectly happy to live around a 66 possession pace, but squeezing every drop out of each trip with the most efficient offense in the country, strong effective field goal numbers, excellent offensive rebounding, and very few wasted possessions. On the other, you get USC trying to drag the fight into something more chaotic, closer to 70 possessions, more physical, more emotional, a game with whistles, bumps, and a crowd that wakes up every time a Trojan throws one down at the rim. Purdue is like that coworker who never looks rushed but always hits every deadline. Slow tempo, very calm, but somehow always ahead on the scoreboard. USC leans more into volatility, chasing contact, hunting free throws, and using rim protection to patch over what is, underneath the blocks, a pretty average half-court defense. Honestly, the guard situation for USC is the part of this story that just keeps tugging on your sleeve. You have key names like Rodney Rice dealing with season-ending shoulder surgery, Amarian Dickerson working back from a hip issue, and freshman Elijah Arenas still waiting to fully step into the spotlight after his knee problem. Even their top scorer, Chad Baker-Mazara, just had that Maryland game where a neck issue kept him from playing his usual role, and there is a big difference between technically available and full go in a track meet against this Purdue group. For a team that wants to live on dribble pressure and foul drawing, that kind of thinning at the guard spots matters more than just the box score. Meanwhile, Purdue shows up like the boring adult in the room. No drama on the mainstream injury reports, same core starters, same rotation patterns, and a coaching staff that pretty much knows exactly what each guy is going to give them. You stack that stability on top of a perfect record in true road games so far, neutral site wins where they have already handled quality opponents, and a healthy double-digit edge over USC in the predictive stuff that bettors care about, things like Ken Palm and Torvik, and the picture starts to look pretty consistent. The narrative is less, can USC shock the world, and more, can USC hang for 40 minutes against a team that treats every Big Ten arena like a checklist? Over time, that kind of structure usually grinds down a short-handed home underdog that feasted on a softer non-conference menu before running into the meat of the league. So from a spread perspective, this sets up as one of those games where the favorite might not blow the doors off right away, but possession by possession, stop by stop, they are built to stretch things out enough to clear the number. As our first pick for this matchup, the Purdue Boilermakers to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Odds makers have basically lit up the board in neon with a total number in the mid-150s, usually sitting around that 154.5 to 155.5 band, which jumps off the page a little for a college game. But when you remember that these two offenses are combining to put up roughly 170 points a night, Purdue in the mid-80s and USC living just a touch below that, The total starts to look more like a reflection of reality than a stunt line. Here is the thing, the game logs back that up. Purdue contests have already climbed past that 154.5 mark several times this season, and USC games have made a habit of flying over the same bar even more often. If you mash their scoring histories together, you land somewhere around a combined average that sits well over this posted total, roughly a mid-teens cushion above what the books are asking you to call. That is not a guarantee, of course, but for bettors it is the kind of pattern that feels less like a coincidence and more like a description of what these teams actually are. The tempo piece is sneaky here too. Purdue is not racing up and down, but when you put an ultra-efficient offense on the floor, you do not need 80 possessions to break a total, you just need enough clean looks and enough trips. USC, on the other hand, loves to live at the stripe, and that is where totals can really get weird. Free throws stop the clock, they add points without burning time, and when a team is elite at drawing contact and converting those freebies, the scoreboard can snowball faster than the eye test suggests. You also have that rim protection angle. Blocks can trigger runouts, and even when they do not, they tend to shape shot selection into more threes and more aggressive drives, both of which tilt toward scoring swings rather than long, patient, low-scoring half-court sets. If you think back to last season, when these teams saw each other twice, neither meeting really qualified as a rock fight. One landed at 90-72 and the other finished 76-71. One cleanly over 150, the other parked right up against that territory. And that was before this version of USC, before some of the offensive upgrades, before the current pace and style narrative that has them leaning into free throws and shot blocking even more. It is a small sample, sure, but it does line up with what the broader numbers and the eye test are both telling us. There is another layer that matters for a total, even if it sounds a little nerdy. Both teams like modern spacing. They are comfortable hunting threes and attacking the paint out of spread sets rather than pounding away with old-school post-ups for 40 minutes. When you blend that with USC's injuries in the backcourt, you actually get more usage shifted toward the primary creators who already score efficiently, which can keep the offense from bogging down, even if the rotation gets shorter. Add a potentially tight whistle in a high-profile game, more free throws, more stoppages, and fewer empty trips, and suddenly a line in the mid-150s does not feel as scary as it looks on first glance. In that kind of environment, travel legs and occasional dry spells can still coexist with a final score that looks more like a track meet than a sleepy grind. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Michigan State versus Washington. This matchup in Seattle feels like one of those games where the spread looks small, but the difference in how these two teams handle chaos feels pretty big. Michigan State brings that classic road favorite profile, the steady group that is comfortable playing in a hostile gym, getting hit in the mouth early, and then just squeezing you a little tighter on every trip. They hang their hat on defense and rebounding, holding opponents to roughly mid-60s in points per night and sitting right near the top nationally in points allowed per game, which is not just a pretty stat. It shows up in how they force you into late clock shots and one-and-done possessions. Washington, on the other hand, feels like the talented band that never quite finishes sound check. The Huskies sit around 10 wins, score in the low 80s on average, and at home they can absolutely light it up when the crowd gets rolling, but there is a lot going on under the hood. Their coach clearly wants tempo and energy, yet if you look at tempo numbers, they sit in that middle chunk of the country, roughly around the 200 mark, which tells you they are not actually running all night, they are just playing emotional basketball within a fairly normal pace. Here is where it gets touchy for Washington. They are dealing with a real injury pileup, not just a guy in street clothes at the end of the bench. Wesley Yates III, who had been one of their biggest minute eaters and a major scoring option, is out indefinitely after wrist surgery. Up front, you have Matty Traore expected to miss the whole season with a foot issue, Christian Nidu shelved long-term with a toe problem and redshirting, and Jacob Ognakovic still in that gray zone of working back from his own foot injury and yet to become a steady part of the rotation. So when you picture this game, you are not really seeing Washington at full creative power. You are seeing them trying to patch together lineups against arguably the most physical rebounding team they have faced on this homestand. Now stack that against what Michigan State is right now. Their main long-term absence is Caleb Glenn, who tore a patellar tendon in the offseason and was ruled out for the year, which hurt their wing depth but did not break their core identity. The players this analysis leans on for them, like Jackson Kohler as a walking double-double threat and Jeremy Fears Jr. as the offensive engine, are very much on the active roster and not just active but thriving, as you can see from their recent performances and usage. You can feel it in that recent win over Indiana, where Fears put up a career night and Kohler quietly stacked another big game on the glass, the perfect little snapshot of how they grind teams down. Washington has shown some fight against this Big Ten gauntlet, no doubt. They pushed Purdue respectably, hung around at Indiana, and even in the loss to Michigan you could see there is enough talent there to scare people when the shots fall and the crowd gets loud. The problem is that those games also expose the same recurring themes: turnovers when pressure ramps up, rebounding stretches where they just cannot finish defensive possessions, and late-game stretches where depth and discipline fade a bit. Michigan State thrives exactly in those pockets, the last 10 minutes when legs get heavy and decisions get harder. They are very comfortable turning an up-and-down first half into a slow, methodical, possession-by-possession strangling of your offense. From a spread angle, this is why that short road favorite number keeps showing up on Michigan State games and why the market tends to respect their profile. You have a team that is very strong on the glass, very strong defensively, and used to winning tight games by simply playing the same way in the last 4 minutes that they played in the first 4. Washington needs streaks and runs and emotional surges. Michigan State needs only consistency. Honestly, if you had to trust one personality with your bet slip in a loud building on a Saturday, it is probably the one that does not care how loud it gets. As our first pick for this matchup, the Michigan State Spartans to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. The number on the total sits in the low 140s, and at first glance it looks like the odds makers are nudging you toward thinking about defense and half-court basketball more than fireworks. A lot of that comes from Michigan State's reputation. They score somewhere in the high 70s but only give up around 64 points per game, and that profile usually drags numbers down because people picture long possessions, tough twos, and very few clean looks at the rim. Here is the twist. Washington's season has played out like the opposite movie. Their games tend to land in the low 150s on average, with an offense that scores around 81 points and a defense that allows roughly mid-70s, and that pattern does not suddenly disappear just because the opponent is tougher. At home especially, their scoring bumps up when they get a push from the crowd, and we have already seen them drop numbers in the 80s against good competition in this building. Michigan State, for their part, is not some plodding rock fight on offense. Recent analytical pieces and previews have them not just as a great defensive group but as a very efficient attack, comfortable scoring in the 70s and 80s even against strong defenses, often boosted by how often they grab their own misses and turn them into easy second chance points. Those extra possessions matter a lot when you think about a total, because every offensive rebound is either a putback or a reset against a scrambled defense, which is basically a small gift to anyone holding an over ticket. Now think about how this game likely flows. The spread is short, the environment is loud, and both teams know this is a big spot on national television, which usually means neither side packs it in mentally if they fall behind by 10. Washington's natural tendency at home is to keep attacking, keep pushing for quick scoring bursts, even if they have to trade a few wild possessions to do it. Michigan State is totally fine answering with patient, efficient half-court sets that still produce points. If this script holds, you get a game that lives around that mid-140s mark without either team needing an outlier shooting night. And then there is the part no model really loves but every bettor knows, the closing minute circus. If Michigan State is up by 2 or 4 late and Washington is still within shouting distance, you can absolutely see a sequence of intentional fouls, free throws, rush threes, and more fouls, the usual endgame chaos that so often takes a reasonable total and nudges it a few points higher. Given that both teams can get to the line and neither is afraid to attack the paint, that late window becomes a very real part of the story, not just a throwaway scenario. So while the defensive reputation pulls the total one way, the actual scoring habits of both teams, especially with Washington's home profile and Michigan State's offensive efficiency, tug it the other direction toward a slightly higher scoring afternoon. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. St. John's versus Villanova. Villanova and St. John's meeting in South Philly on a Saturday night with matching 5-1 league records is exactly the kind of Big East game that messes with oddsmakers and fans at the same time. You have the preseason darling that everybody crowned early, rolling again after some wobbles, walking in as the short road favorite. On the other side, you have a so-called retooling Villanova group that quietly sits at 14-3 overall and 5-1 in the league. Fresh off a road sweep at Marquette and Providence, and somehow they are catching points in what is effectively their own downtown living room at Xfinity Mobile Arena. That underdog tag at home already tells you this line is tilted more by brand and recency bias than by any real gap between these two rosters. Here is the thing. Villanova's whole personality right now is built around control. They are not the old guard that walked the ball up and won rock fights in the low 60s, but they still care a lot about valuing possessions, contesting the glass, and forcing you to beat them with real half-court offense instead of pure chaos. Duke Brennan and Matt Hodge give them a physical, grown front line, and when you pair that with Tyler Perkins on the wing and guards like Bryce Lindsey and a Caden Lewis handling, you get a team that can both absorb contact and still stay organized when things get wild. They just went into Marquette and held their nerve in a one-possession game, then rolled into Providence and dropped 88 while still winning the rebound and turnover battles. That is not an accident. Now layer in the context. Villanova is 8-1 at home this season, whether that is on campus or down at Xfinity Mobile Arena, and they already showed in the Big 5 Classic that the sightlines and the stage do not bother them at all. They won that event and used it as a springboard into this league run. Even with the rotation thinner than anyone expected, thanks to Chris Jeffrey and Wade Chittick both sidelined with knee issues and Tafara Gapare leaving the program, the guys who are left have settled into clear roles. Devin Askew has become the classic Big East sixth man who can swing a game in 25 minutes. Malachi Palmer and Braden Pierce give them real size and juice off the bench, and the starting group has enough shooting that you cannot simply load up the paint and pray. Depth is a concern in theory, but the reality is that Kevin Willard is already coaching as if he knows he has 6.5 guys he really trusts, and the team is responding to that tighter rope. St. John's wants this game to feel like a street run at Rucker Park. They come in scoring around 86 points per night, and over the last 3 league games, they have basically been holding open tryouts for who wants to be the next guy to drop 20. 95 at Georgetown, 90 at Creighton, 92 on Marquette, all by comfortable margins, is not just hot shooting, it is an identity. They send wave after wave of size and athleticism with Zuby Ejiofor at the center of everything, wings like Bryce Hopkins and Dylan Mitchell flying in from the corners, and a backcourt where Oziah Sellers has slid into that starting point guard spot and immediately started putting up big nights, including 24 against Marquette. It looks terrifying when it is humming, but there is always a cost. Playing that fast, with that much downhill pressure, means turnovers, fouls, and the occasional 5-minute stretch where the shot selection looks like a late-night rec league. Even in this recent heater, St. John's has shown pockets where they can give you the ball or forget a rotation, and Villanova is exactly the sort of opponent that punishes those little cracks with calm, not panic. When you are laying a short number on the road, those handful of wasted possessions matter a lot more than the highlight dunks. So you line it all up. You have 2 teams sitting side by side in the standings, both playing well, both well coached, and the market still hanging a number that asks St. John's to not just win, but to win in a building where Villanova has basically owned the season so far. The Wildcats' ability to keep their turnovers down, compete on the glass, and drag just enough possessions into their comfort zone makes that underdog label feel more like a gift than a warning. In a 1 or 2 possession game, the points can end up being the difference between a fun sweat and a painful beat. As our first pick for this matchup, the Villanova Wildcats to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. Now let us talk about the total, because this number in the high 140s is basically daring you to decide whether this turns into another St. John's track meet or whether Villanova can convince them to play half-court chess. Honestly, when you look at how both teams have been trending, it is very hard to picture a sleepy, grinding game that ends up in the low 70s. St. John's is living in the 80s and 90s right now. Those last 5 games read like you accidentally set the difficulty to rookie on a video game, with that 3-game stretch of 95, 90, and 92 as the loudest statement. They do not just play fast, they also run lineups that put multiple playmakers on the floor, with Ejiofor creating from the post, wings cutting, and guard spacing and driving. Villanova on paper is the slower team, but you can see the evolution in their recent box scores. 76 at Marquette, 88 at Providence, and even some earlier non-conference games where they quietly pushed into the 80s. They are not walking the ball up and milking 29 seconds off every clock anymore. Lewis can push in transition, Perkins likes to attack early before the defense is set, and Brennan runs the floor well enough that they can steal a few easy ones. When a supposedly control-oriented team is already scoring in the upper 70s on average and is facing a group that wants to hit turbo from the opening tip, the total number starts to feel a bit shy. Here is the fun part. The clash of styles can actually help the over instead of hurt it. If St. John's turns this into an up-and-down game, Villanova has already shown they are willing to match pace when the matchup demands it, like they did at Providence. If Villanova manages to slow things a bit, that usually means they are running more half-court offense through their bigs and playing through contact, which leads to fouls, bonus situations, and free throws piling up late. Either way, you get efficient scoring chances. St. John's defense is not bad, but it is not some suffocating unit that erases mistakes, and they are happy to trade a made three for a layup if it keeps the tempo high. Villanova's defense is sturdier, yet even they can bend when facing multiple rim threats and a hot shooting night from the opponent. You also have some classic over-friendly ingredients sitting in the background. Both teams have bigs who can pass, which means extra cutting, more backdoor layups, and fewer empty ISOs. Both have guards who can draw fouls on the dribble, and in a tight, emotional game for early Big East positioning, you often see whistles get a little friendlier to the drivers as everyone gets more aggressive. Add in the modern math of three-point volume, especially from St. John's, and you are one hot stretch away from this total being in trouble well before the final media timeout. When the projected number sits in the upper 140s and both offenses are already living in the mid-70s as a baseline, it does not take a lot of things going right for this to sneak into something like an 81-78 kind of scoreline. Even a close finish with intentional fouling can give you that extra 3 or 4 possessions that take a sweat into a comfortable clearance. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. BYU versus Texas Tech. The books are treating this like a classic home court tax spot, with Texas Tech laying a short number in their own building, while a top 15 BYU group walks in getting a couple of buckets despite having only one loss on the season and a very loud winning streak. On the surface, that sounds perfectly reasonable. You have a Red Raiders team that has turned its home floor into a comfort zone, blowing people out in Lubbock and routinely living in the 90-point neighborhood, and oddsmakers almost always charge extra for that kind of home comfort, especially on a Saturday night in the Big 12. Here is the thing. BYU has been playing all year like the team that should be laying the points, not catching them. They are sitting at 16-1 with a 13-game heater, winning by close to 19 points per night and knocking down around 9 threes a game while still hammering the glass. That is not the profile of a fragile jump shooting group. That is the profile of a group that travels. They have already gone into Kansas State and handled business by double digits, and then into Utah and come out of a tight shootout with an 89-84 road win, so the idea of a hostile gym is not exactly new to them. If anything, they seem to enjoy walking into someone else's party and changing the playlist. Texas Tech's home resume is still real, of course. 9 wins, no losses, huge scoring margins, tons of threes, and a crowd that can feel like it is leaning over your shoulder while you bring the ball up. But by now that story is fully baked into this point spread. Oddsmakers know people love the ranked home favorite that scores in the 80s and 90s, so you are paying retail for that logo. What feels slightly behind, at least from a value angle, is just how complete BYU has been. They sit top 25 nationally in scoring, they rebound at a top-tier level, and they are holding opponents below 41% from the field and below 30% from deep. That combination, scoring punch with real defensive teeth, usually does not need help from the number. Both benches are dealing mostly with guys who have been out for a while or are redshirting, so the rotations that built BYU's 13-game streak and Texas Tech's home run are basically what you are getting again. Polls and advanced numbers both treat this as almost a coin flip, and BYU even owns the better scoring margin, roughly plus 18.8 per game compared to Texas Tech's plus 10 or so. So you have a near coin flip matchup on paper where one side is being spotted a few points just because of the arena. Honestly, that is the kind of spot where taking the dog is less about being brave and more about being stubborn with the math, especially when that underdog has every reason to walk in believing they can win the game outright, not just keep it close. As our first pick for this matchup, the BYU Cougars to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. Now, once you have wrapped your head around the spread drama, the next question is simple. How wild does this scoreboard actually get? Oddsmakers opened this total in the high 150s, around 158.5, and some shops nudged it toward 159.5, while a few models pushed projections into the low 160s. That is a big number. That is the kind of total that makes you sit back for a second and ask, are they really turning this into a track meet? Look at how both teams live on offense, and you can see why the number is that high. BYU is putting up about 87.5 points per game. Texas Tech is in the low 80s, and neither figure is some hot week inflated by one weird game. BYU has cracked 103 different times already, including hanging 104 on Arizona State, plus that 89 spot on Utah on the road. Texas Tech at home is even more ridiculous. They are scoring just over 90 points per game in their own gym with a scoring margin over 20 and double-digit wins basically the default setting. What really matters for a total, though, is not just that they score, but how they score. Both offenses spread you out, lean into the three ball, and still grab enough rebounds to create extra possessions. BYU is shooting right around 49% from the field, mid-30s from deep, and mid-70s at the line while pulling a bit over 40 rebounds a night. Texas Tech sits in the high 40s from the floor, high 30s from three, almost 39 rebounds a game, and their offense grades out in that top 20 to top 25 neighborhood on a lot of efficiency boards. So you are not just talking about fast. You are talking about fast and efficient, the dangerous combo for any under ticket. You can almost picture it ahead of time. Long rebounds turning into quick threes the other way, foul trouble giving you bonus free throws, and neither coach exactly begging his guys to slow it down for the sake of aesthetics. The history between these programs leans toward points too. Their last three meetings have averaged right around 150 total points, and that was before BYU cranked the offense up even more and before Texas Tech turned their home floor into a nightly fireworks show. The only clean path to the under here is a brick fest from deep on one side or both. And sure, that can happen because sometimes the ball just does not want to go in. But that is hoping for cold shooting more than it is trusting what both offenses have been all season. Given the pace, the shot profile, the whistle-friendly physical play in this league, and two teams that are totally comfortable trading haymakers, the most natural script is both of them living somewhere in the 80s. It will not always land that way, but when the matchup, the stats, and the recent form all sing the same song, it is hard not to lean into the chaos and root for a scoreboard that moves fast and never really slows down. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. That's all for now, so if you have any other games you would like reviewed, then leave a comment down below with the game you would like analyzed, subscribe to our channel, leave a like on this video, and we'll get to it as soon as we possibly can. We would also love to hear your opinion on the picks presented to you in this video, whether you agree or disagree with them, so leave a comment down below and do let us know.